Well, hey guys, welcome back to the channel. No, wait, hold on. I've got to do a better one than that. Well, hey there, and welcome back to the channel. That's my best impersonation. If you listen to the Pro Church Tools podcast, then you're familiar with that intro. And let me just tell you, Brady, that intro slaps at 1.5 times speed.
I mean, if you're not listening at 1.5 times speed on your podcast at this point, there's a room for you to grow in 2023. It will change your life.
Absolutely. Yes. You know, and some people you can get 1.75 and then you accidentally listen to them at normal speed and you're like, this is not the same person. This is weird. So
all of my Audible, I listen at 1.8 because in audiobooks, I find there's a lot more of a gentle and, rhythmic cadence. In podcasts, a little more hectic. So 1.5 is the max for me. And I do tend to talk pretty quickly on 1x speed as it is. So I'd probably limit myself to 1.5 if you are a listener to the Pro Church Tools show. But of course, it's your prerogative. Follow your heart.
That's awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for being on the channel. If you guys don't follow Brady Shearer on all of his channels, we're going to definitely link to those. But I'm sure that if you've been around the worship and tech world for a while, you've heard of Pro Church Tools and Brady. And we're going to dive into a lot of just like social media topics and things for our churches that I think a lot of us are asking these questions about. So let's just jump into it. Number one, Brady, you've already talked a lot about this year, but like, what is the biggest trend for 2023 for churches that we need to be capitalizing on that maybe we're not truly taking advantage of? What do you think?
I think the biggest trend is that all of the major social platforms for the first time in the history of social are beginning to prioritize the same thing, which is unique. And it's great news for us as creators, because if you think about the history of social media, typically what you do on Instagram couldn't just be republished to Twitter or to TikTok or to YouTube or to Snapchat when Snapchat had its moment. And that's because each platform had its own specialty. But what's happened is with the rise of TikTok in the last few years and the emphasis on what we call discovery algorithms, social platforms are realizing that we're kind of in this, moment of evolution, this moment of adjustment, and platforms need to make changes to, at least in their minds, copy the success of TikTok. So if I can break down a little bit more about discovery algorithms, social really becomes popular around 2010, YouTube's launching in 2005, Facebook publicly opening 2007. Let's say 2010 as a rough marker, which would include Twitter as well. And social platforms have always been based upon what we call a social graph algorithm. So if me and Ryland are friends on Facebook, the things that he posts and his interests, those have an influence on my algorithm and what I see in my, For You page or in my news feed, whatever you want to call it. TikTok realizes that Facebook is such a big conglomerate that, like every oncomer that has tried to take on Facebook, you don't win that game. Either you get acquired by Facebook, or Facebook will just take your features that you have popularized, bring them into their own platform and win. Why? Why do they win? Well, because the social graph on Facebook for you is going to be much longer than this new platform, meaning your friends and your memories and everything that you've built on that platform, or let's say Instagram, which is also under the Meta umbrella, that is such an important weighty factor that it's going to take precedent over the popularized feature that, let's say, Snapchat brings with stories. So TikTok says, well, we're not going to play that game at all. And they've come out and said publicly, we are not a social platform. We are an entertainment platform. And basically what TikTok does is they say, we're not going to give you a For You page or a news feed based on the social graph. We're going to give it to you based on your interests and your viewing habits. And we are going to take notice of everything that you're doing, which, to be fair, Facebook does as well. Hover time, watch time, view time, likes, saves, shares. But that is going to determine and dictate what you see. Who you follow, your friends, doesn't really matter so much. It's all going to be based on your viewing preferences. And this dramatically takes off. And so Facebook says, well, we need to integrate this in Instagram with Reels. And YouTube integrates it with Shorts. And Facebook integrates it with Reels on their own platform. And now every major social platform, and Twitter has even begun to dabble in this as well, is now saying, these discovery algorithms, which are powered by short-form vertical video, are what we are emphasizing. And so you can create a single piece of content, Ryland, one 9x16 piece of vertical video, let's say 60 seconds or less, which will work on every platform, and you can publish it to TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts. Publish it to Twitter if you want to experiment with that as well. And that singular piece of content is not just usable on every platform, it's actually the ideal. You no longer need to cater to each platform's specialty. That means less work with the potential of more reach. So win-win.
Yeah, man. We've been leaning into all of those things that you're talking about, and we've seen the random successes on each one, which is why you just publish them to all and maybe one will take off. But let's talk more about like this discovery algorithm age that we're living in. And I think it's a two-edged sword for churches, because historically smaller churches have defined success more on like how we're creating community, maybe within our local reach of our towns, and even just like reaching our church bodies. And now the discovery algorithm is kind of that curse of like, you don't even see your friends' posts anymore on your normal feeds. All you're seeing is things that it's feeding you, right? And so like, what does success look like for a church on social with discovery algorithms? Should we all be striving for that viral short form video? I mean, what do you think?
I mean, I don't think that is something that I would emphasize or prioritize, but I do think it can become a byproduct of using social platforms the way that social platforms are currently encouraging you to use them. The analogy that I always use is, waves on the ocean crashing onto the shore. You can stand up to those waves and try to fight them. And what will often happen is we will find a little bit of a rhythm on social, or we're just used to how it works, and then something changes. And because social is such an emerging industry even now, it's beginning to mature a bit, but it's still such a young industry, 15 to 20 years old. That means it's going to change a lot as it finds its footing and as it figures out what maturity looks like for it. Changes happen, and we don't like them. So we might want to stand up to those waves. We're going to fight those. Look, eventually the wave is going to knock you over. My approach has always been, I'm going to try to ride that wave, okay? The wave is going to go where it's going to go. I don't really have control over that, but I do have control if I try to ride the wave or if I try to fight against it. So one of the terms that we've coined this year and begun encouraging churches to embrace is something called social sermons. And a social sermon is where you take the sermon file that almost every church now has, thanks to the pandemic. You take your recorded sermon video and you repurpose it for these social platforms. And when done correctly, and this gets to your question about should we be kind of going for virality? When done correctly, a single social sermon can reach each of the 3 distinct audiences that your church needs to be considering online. And the first of those 3 audiences is, of course, your existing congregation. Presumably, those in your church are connected to you online as well. And what's amazing is that with these digital platforms and the time that we're spending online, you don't just have your in-person services, but you have, as we always say, the 167 hours beyond Sunday service where you can impact, engage, and reach your existing congregation. So there's that audience. The second audience is going to be people that are not yet connected to your church, but over the course of a year, are checking out your church online, because that's where first impressions are made now. So a new family moves into your community, they're considering where to go to church, they type your church online, and they come across your Instagram. And within a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes, they are making first impressions about your church, and they're learning about it. And what's great about a social sermon, where you repurpose a sermon video, is that they won't need to sit through or engage an entire live stream. Within the span of 60 seconds or less, they can get a pretty accurate feel of like, what does this church look like from the pew? And what does the cadence of the pastor sound like? And what are they passionate about based on the subject matter within this sermon? Okay, I'm learning a lot pretty quickly. So that's the second audience that you need to consider. Those that are just checking out your church online, the first impressions that are being made, because that does translate to that first audience and the existing congregation, the integrated members of your church. There's a third audience, and that is people that are not connected to your church, maybe not connected to faith whatsoever. And discovery algorithms, as you just said, Ryland, are going to put your content in front of those people. The amazing thing about a social sermon is that that singular piece of content can reach all 3 audiences at the same time without compromise. If you're a person that is in the church already, seeing that sermon for a second time, if you were in service, that makes a big difference on fully ingesting the message from that service. We hear something once, we're more likely to forget it. You hear a second time, okay, now that's beginning to take root and now impacting life change, because the message is not just something I heard and forgot, but as Jesus talks about in that parable, it begins to take root, that truth within me. People don't attend church and they miss a message, seeing some of those highlights, also useful on social. Of course, we mentioned the people that are checking out your church online and why it's valuable for them. They're seeing what your church is all about instantly. And then for the people that are not connected to church, not connected to God whatsoever, the good news reaching them online. Maybe that person never steps foot into your church. That's almost likely, almost certain. But we want to push back as the global church against the growing wave of negativity that we're beginning to see online. We have a role in that individually and also collectively. And so you post that social sermon, perhaps you don't have the bandwidth as a smaller church to dedicate all of your social content specifically to pushing back against that negativity. But if you could create a single piece of content that prioritizes your existing congregation, takes care of those checking you out online, and then also at the same time pushes back against that growing wave of online negativity, now we've got something that's really special. And if your post goes viral because of that, great. You put a call to action at the end of every one of those social sermons. Hey, check out the full message on YouTube. Check out the full message on our podcast. They're listening now to the full message. Within that, they are being prompted to connect to a pastor to prayer. They're saying, hey, fill out the connect card online. They're hearing more about the message fully in its own context for that week. And so the byproduct of doing the right thing could be that virality. I don't think it's worth prioritizing, but it doesn't mean you have to create specific content for it either. If you do the right thing, that one piece of content can reach all three distinct groups.
Yeah, that's great thoughts, man. I want to get your ideas and thoughts around the idea of the pay-to-play stuff. Do you have any guidance or principles for us when we think through Facebook ads, boosting posts, Google ads? Should we be paying to play the new Meta verified stuff? Things like that. What are you telling churches of the average size? Like, we run about 450 people here on a Sunday. So what do you think about that?
I think Facebook ads are appropriate for most churches when done with a premeditated strategy in mind. So if you want to see our full thoughts on this, you can go to nucleus.church/blog, or if it's easier, just search church Facebook ads into YouTube or Google, and our content will almost certainly come up high up there. What we recommend in the context of Facebook ads is you want to look at like the already established rhythms of your church and the events that you do that are meant to service your community, but also still align with the mission of your church. And one thing you'll hear me say a lot is that online ministry and in-person ministry, or said differently, online and offline, are both unique, and they work best when they're doing what they each do best individually, and they're working together in harmony. One thing we saw from the pandemic was online was carrying and shouldering a burden that was too great for it. It was never meant to replace in-person ministry. That's just not ever what it's going to do. I encourage churches to use digital. I would never in a million years say like, yeah, you can do church entirely online. That's not my theology or my ecclesiology. But then prior to the pandemic, we had these amazing digital platforms, and churches, for the most part, were not embracing them or making use of them because they didn't really see their value or importance. Hopefully we come out of this and both are working and there's congruency between the two. That's the word that I use. You want congruency. In person, and what you do already, that's established. What you do online should be an extension of that. It shouldn't be this totally different thing. So think about your existing church calendar. Maybe you do something big around Easter and Christmas. It's very typical for churches. You do something, like an Easter egg drop, or you do pictures with Santa, or you do a big Christmas service that's, something that is very widely attended because people are like, yeah, I want to see the Christmas experience, the Christmas service at the church. I only go to church once a year, but I always go to the Christmas one. Great. So that's the rhythm that already exists in your church. We call those bridge events, the types of events that intersect between what's valuable to the average person in your community, but at the same time align with your church. We never recommend that you do something that doesn't align with your church for the sake of reaching people. No, it needs to align with your values and mission. When you do have something at that intersection, that's the sweet spot. We call that a bridge event. You want to take that bridge event and you make a promotion for it using Facebook ads, and that's something where now you do that year over year for your 2 or 3 bridge events every year, and now people are starting to, they built a bit of a rapport with your church. A lot of them have come in person. Those that haven't have seen your church advertised. They've seen, oh, that's the name of that church. Oh, that's what they do. Maybe they don't come the first year, but they come the second year, the third year. That's where Facebook ads can play a really valuable role in that sort of thing. But pay to play, broadly speaking, That's how it's always been with media, right? You wouldn't expect to get a radio ad or a TV ad or a billboard or mail outs for free, right? That would never be a thing. What social afforded and still does provide us is something pretty amazing, which is free organic reach. But if you really want to amplify that as these social platforms become that much more saturated and that much more competitive, yeah, absolutely. Spending a bit of money there, especially if you're used to spending money in traditional media markets. Oh yeah, we've done a billboard before. Oh yeah, we always do mail outs around Easter. We're here a month out from Easter at the time of this recording. Maybe you experiment with Facebook ads. Check out our YouTube video on it. Check out our blog post. It walks you through exactly how to do it with many examples of real churches, big, small, all around the world that have done this successfully. So use their examples and their creative as inspiration for what you do yourself. My inclination would be that drives greater results for less cost, which means you're a better steward of your resources and more people are hearing about your church, and then byproduct of that, life change, connection to Jesus.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we've dabbled in it and we put some of our publicity, shifted things from like, why are we still running a Yellow Pages ad? No one has looked at the Yellow Pages in years and it has the wrong service times. Obviously, no one's looking at it. So let's drive that towards more digital stuff. I mean, I've even heard some things just yesterday, some guys talking about running local ads on Hulu that's specific for the localized people. Some different stuff that we should be thinking about as churches on how can we get our message to the right people. But I love what you said about like making our digital presence an extension of our in-person service. And when I think about that, I immediately think about my pastor, who is an amazing communicator, and we do the social sermons kind of thing. We repost his content, but he has this longing to be present on social media, but he struggles with the perfection idea of like he wants a C200 in his office with lighting before he's ready to post, or just the maybe hesitancy of like being open and transparent to anyone and everyone with his daily life. So what advice would you give to these pastors that want to be engaged on social media somehow, but they can't get unstuck, so to say?
Well, I mean, in my experience, your pastor sounds like a bit of an outlier, because the more common experience is pastors that, sure, they'll let the church, the intern, the youth pastor, worship pastor dabble in social. They wouldn't even say that it's absent redeeming qualities, but they have no personal interest in it whatsoever. So if you start in a place where you have personal interest, that to me is the biggest barrier to overcome. I get the question, how do I get my pastor to like care about social? I'm like, I don't think you're gonna. You can't force them to have interest in something. And at least if we think about it from their perspective, like they've probably been in ministry. The average Protestant pastor is 60 years old in America. They've been in ministry for 20, 30, 40 years. And now suddenly you're telling them, you have to use this new social platform. I have no familiarity with it, and I have been serving the Lord for a long time without it. I do not feel compelled to change. If you want to go for it, great. I'm not going to be the bottleneck in my church, ideally, but let's also not think that I'm going to be the one leading the charge. The churches and pastors that do have that passion for it are usually the ones that are, doing the most work and the best work in terms of traction. I mean, Mike Todd at Transformation Church is the best example of this. I mean, think about how big that church is, and he's still doing, at least, when he talked about this a couple of years ago, the majority of his own social content. Because that's the thing. It's about you connecting with other people. And if I could say anything to a pastor that really has those high production standards, you really got to come at it from the angle of what are you trying to accomplish on social? Because if you're trying to curate a certain image, then that would probably be the reason why you care about having that great quality. If you're trying to be effective, first and foremost, I don't think you can really make a case that the highest production quality with your C200 is going to contribute to that. And the reason I say that is because nowadays social is, most of the stuff we see is shot on phones because of its accessibility. And so, if anything, shooting on that higher quality stuff might even be a detriment to the average consumer. Now, we at Pro Church Tools, we continue to shoot with pretty high quality because our audience is creators. And so they have a taste for high quality. And so we can get away with that. But honestly, candidly, I ask myself sometimes, I'm like, maybe I should do more with just my phone. But I'm like, ugh.
Absolutely, man.
I have that same feeling. I'm like, but also my FX3. I mean, I want to use it. I love it. So You could make a case that I need to take my own advice here. I would say, no. See, my audience is creators, so they need the high quality. But for your pastor and for churches, the people that are using social, they are not photographers and videographers and media directors and church comms pastors. They are everyday people. And so they don't have that same requirement for high standards. In fact, it could actually be a detriment. So to me, any decision has to be made in context of mission. We want to be effective in fulfilling the church's mission. Does a C200 to shoot Instagram videos contribute to that mission? I don't know. I mean, if you want to do it for personal preference, stylistically, sure. But I don't think that that's moving the needle towards effectiveness. And if anything, if it's hurting your ability to stay consistent and to really dive into certain things, you can make an argument it's working against the mission. And in that case, look, we need to prioritize effectiveness, mission over method. We all have certain methods that we care about that are like ones that we're familiar with, we're comfortable with, but they can't take precedent over mission because that is not a good steward of resources.
Yeah. You know, I think a lot of churches like ours, we're valuing excellence in what we're putting out there online, but that is definitely some conversation that I'm having is that, like, should we be being more real with the things we're putting on Reels? You know, are we looking like an advertisement too soon and people are just swiping by? Should we really be leaning into just, hey, I'm just holding my phone here kind of thing and being okay with that? I mean, I even wonder with our sermons that we're posting out there, how quickly are people going to get saturated with these things to where it's just so quick for them to swipe by a sermon? We did for a while. Our pastor every Monday morning would do a 60-second recap where he literally was just holding his phone. And those actually have been more successful sometimes than me spending 3 hours editing down a reel and making it fancy. And so it's an interesting social world we're living in right now.
Yeah, and it's also crucial to understand that not all digital is made equal. Like, don't hear me what I'm saying, hey, shoot your live stream with your phone and not your C200. I mean, use what you have. Yeah. But like, if you have the C200, yeah, I would use that and not your phone for recording your sermon videos. But a live stream is very different from Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, maybe not YouTube Shorts at least, and TikTok. And so understanding the unique nuances of these platforms, but that's not easy. Like, so social sermons, this idea that we've created, you can go to churchsocialmediaplan.com. There's a full workshop. We explain every single thing in detail, how to do it for free. And then socialsermons.com is also a platform where we do it for churches. So we're full right now. We launched space for 100 churches. They were all taken up. So we start sending out these social sermons, and a lot of the churches, they get it, they publish it, great results. Praise God. Some, they send me an email. They're like, Brady, like the cuts in this and the zooms, they're pretty aggressive. Like, it's a lot. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, could you dial it back? And I say, why? And they're like, I just don't know if I like how much it changes. That's not how we do our live stream. I totally understand. The reason we do this is because the culture of short form video is something needs to be changing every 3 seconds. Otherwise, it's going to be very different than all of the other videos that people see, and they're going to be that much more likely to swipe away. So in the context of effectiveness and mission over method, you might prefer stylistically for them to be slower. And I always tell our clients, at least, like, hey, you get to make the call on this. So if you want us to do it a certain way, go for it. So far, every single one, when I've explained it in context, they're like, yeah, you know what? We need to prioritize mission over method. Stylistically, that's not what I prefer. Look, we make decisions all the time in the creative context. Like, I would do this, that would be the method I would choose, but I know for effectiveness and fulfillment of mission and the ideology of mission over method, we need to prioritize that. And we don't always know with certainty, but we can often have a pretty good informed guess. Like, for instance, you're listening to this podcast, and let's say neither of us were using a microphone. Now, to be fair, I'm in my home office using a dinky microphone that is not that high quality. But Ryland has his great setup, right? And he's the host as he should. Now, that's important because basically every podcast has very good audio nowadays because it's very cheap to do good audio. Now, let's imagine for whatever reason, Ryland was like, you know what? We need to be real and authentic. So I'm going to record everything on my AirPods, and that way it sounds like you're on a phone call with me. Well, if every podcast I listen to sounds one way and then Ryland sounds another way, that becomes a detriment at that point because there are certain just cultural standards and unsaid expectations of that medium. And Ryland might say, yeah, but I want it to be more real. Sure, but from an effectiveness standpoint, people just aren't going to listen because it's going to sound so bizarre compared to everything else. You bring that ideology to TikTok, and it's kind of the opposite, because the culture and nuances of all these different destinations and platforms are unique. And that's why, people say, how do I get better at this? I'm like, the only really way to get better is to be a practitioner. You have to be on these platforms consuming, and then ideally also creating, because that's the only way that you pick up the cues and realize, the older you get, you start hearing words from the younger generation, and they say things like, oh, how's your Riz? And people go, what? That is not a word. By the way, it is based in the word charisma. That is the root word. It just basically means your game with the opposite gender. Like, how much game do you have? So you get older and you start to feel out of touch, right? We all get to this point where like, these kids, they dress this way, they talk this way. I don't get it. Why do you not get it? Because you are not in the trenches in high school anymore. The same thing will happen with these social platforms. If you are not using them, if you are not actively on them, you're not going to understand how to produce and create on them. That's just how it's going to be. Just like I can't walk up to a group of high school kids and look like I fed in with the lingo, because they'll know I don't know the lingo because I'm not in the trenches. So you have to be a practitioner on these platforms, and that does require some investment for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's think through. I want to talk to you about something that you guys have served the church in this area. One way that y'all have done that has been filling the gap for churches that don't have a staff person to tackle some of this stuff. Like I think back to, you guys do video announcements for churches all over the place. You guys offer now this, sermon stuff for people, and you're kind of filling that gap. But like, what advice would you give? How does a church know when it's time to put some actual funds towards staffing someone to do that at their church? Because I think a lot of times churches say that social is super important or digital footprint is extremely important, but then they put $0 towards it and they add it on to the youth minister's job position. So like, what would you say? How does a church know when it's kind of time to lean or put some funding towards that? Or is it not wise until you cross a threshold? What do you think?
I mean, that's going to be a pretty individual decision based on the values of the church and the decision makers. I think if we're talking specifically about a church, let's imagine, that has some younger folks, some not senior staff that see the value of it, and the senior leader doesn't. I think that the best path forward is for the junior staff, in that case, the non-senior leaders, to exhaust every effort they can on the free side of things to demonstrate the value of digital. It's pretty rare at this point for a church to not at all recognize the value of digital. It's very rare for a church not to have a website, for example. So virtually every church sees the value in digital because we have a website. Great. So you saw some value in it. And at that point, it's all just about demonstrating how whatever project you're proposing in the digital space can move the needle forward on the mission of the church. And you'll hear me say this again and again. I will say it on every podcast. I'll say it in every video. And you'll say, Brady, stop saying it. It's the only thing that matters. Does this move the mission of the church forward? Brady Shearer does not care about digital media. Brady Shearer cares about the good news and the gospel and discipleship, people becoming more like Jesus. And I see digital as helping play a big, big role in that. If there comes a day where digital media no longer is useful in that role, well, it's mission over method, right? And we make a change. And so any project, any endeavor, do we spend more money on this? Do we try a new social platform? Do we try making these social sermons ourselves? Well, how might it affect the mission of the church? Demonstrate that conceptually, then demonstrate it in practice. So here's how that might look. Let's get real practical here. You go to your pastor and you say, hey, look, we know how much effort and time you put into preparing your sermons every week. We know that your message and your sermon can reach dramatically more people online than we ever could in this sanctuary. It's just simple logistics. Our auditorium, let's say, seats 50,000, all right? We rent out the football stadium. Our church is in the same stadium where the New York Giants play. We're in MetLife Stadium, so it's 80,000 people. Great. I can reach more than 80,000 people online pretty easily. Doesn't mean I will, but it's possible. So we want to amplify that work that you're doing. And so you say, we're going to take these sermon files that we're already recording, we're going to put them online. And then you do that, right? And you demonstrate how it went. So we had a couple of churches reach out to me just this week only. And they, one church that we work with, so we had created their social sermons. Another that was like, hey, we can't afford your service. All the spots filled out. But in that churchsocialmediaplan.com workshop, you told us everything to do. We're making them ourselves. Praise God. That's what we want. 2 screenshots of analytics on Instagram, both from churches of around 100 to 300. Both of them, their social sermon had reached about 100 people that follow them and 12,000 people that did not follow them on Instagram. So churches of 100 to 300 people reaching 12,000 unique accounts that do not follow them on social media with the good news of Jesus Christ. That's the power of these digital platforms, right? And now you might say, well, will those people ever come to that church and give and volunteer and serve? I don't know, but remember, as we talked about earlier, that single piece of content is also relevant to the 100 people that follow this account that this social sermon also reached. And it's relevant because it is now always on that church's Instagram profile. I would pin that video so that when people check out your church online, that's that second distinct audience that we talked about, and they see that pinned video, they're like, wow, look at this awesome video that reached all these people. This church is cool. And I love this message too, because if it gained a ton of traction online, it's probably a pretty universal message that everyone is interested in hearing. And that's a great byproduct of that as well. So exhaust all your efforts to demonstrate the value of digital, whatever project, whatever you're asking for. If you need more budget, if you just need permission to try something, align it with the mission of the church. That's how every decision should be made and proposed.
Amen. That's good stuff. All right, man. I want to wrap this up by doing some like rapid fire, overrated, underrated, where just to get your thoughts on some different social topics, things we do as church tech people. All right. Metaverse, church, and VR. Overrated, underrated.
Overrated by Facebook, underrated by the rest of the world because no one's ready for it.
Yeah. Okay.
Properly rated by the rest of the world currently.
Okay. Nice. Church websites.
Ooh. Probably underrated. They're just like, they are the cornerstone of what you do online. They are the most important entity. They are the entity that you own. You don't rent that space. You can always move to a different host. Facebook makes some changes. You can't move to a different Facebook. They have the monopoly on that. Same with church apps. Apple makes a change. You can't get your app in the App Store any other way. There's a problem with your website host. Take it somewhere else. Most important thing that you have in the digital world. So it's always going to be underrated.
Trending audio on Instagram and TikTok.
Overrated. It can index with videos that you don't want your church to see if they click on that audio and another creator uses it in ways that you're like, ooh, it looks like we're associated with them. You're not, but people don't necessarily understand how digital works, and suddenly your video is next to a video you don't want them to see. Also, I am not convinced it makes a big difference in distribution at this point on discovery algorithms. Back in the day on SEO, search engine optimization, you could put a keyword in your URL and Google would be like, oh, this website must have something to do with that keyword. And then they became a lot smarter. Same thing's happening with discovery algorithms. They are indexing every single frame and word that is spoken in your video. The words that are spoken, even if you don't have captions, are being transcribed, and that's being used for distribution and what the video is about. Simply like piggybacking on a trending sound is no longer a guarantee of anything. And I would say it has potentially more harm than good, because what can also happen is if that trending audio ever gets pulled, your entire video's audio gets pulled. This happened to me several times. They didn't just pull the trending sound, which was a different track than my voice. They muted the entire video. So now I'm on a video with captions going, I'm moving my mouth and you can't hear anything. And now the video was suspended, basically, just because the trending sound got pulled. Why am I being punished for that? So overrated. At this point, I'm recommending churches just avoid it.
AI, chat GPT, things like that.
Yeah, it's probably underrated. I know it's having a big moment and everyone's like seeing it everywhere. I don't know if we truly understand how disruptive and how it's going to be part of the fabric of everything that we do. Facebook had hundreds of millions of users pretty quick, right? In 2007, 2010 range. You're like, oh, how could that be underrated? Well, we didn't really understand what it was signaling for the next 15 years. I think what people were trying to make the metaverse be, the AI disruption actually is. And so it's going to change a lot of things. Yeah.
The social media platform Be Real.
Yeah. I mean, at this point it's overrated. I feel like it had a moment and it's kind of dipped. I mean, I had fun on it while it lasted.
Yeah, same here. I'm kind of done with it. Church logos and branding.
Oh, probably overrated. I think churches really get stuck on this thing. Like the logo needs to be this. The branding. Like at the end of the day, like branding is not really defined by your visuals anyway. It's what people say about you. But you know, the name of my company is Pro Church Tools, and our logo for the longest time was like a P inside of a C. Is like the worst company name ever and the stupidest logo that we got on like, you know, what's this 99designs.com for like $99. So yeah. And it comes to like the effectiveness of your church, you can get by with pretty poor branding and a logo. There's a low floor to like competency there that as long as you hit there, you know, you're 90% of reaping the benefits. If you have like a out of this world logo and stuff like that, that can matter for like, you know, a few people that really care about that stuff. For the most people, it's not going to matter. So, you know, don't stress too much about it.
Branded house over house of brands.
Well, this is my idea, so it's got to be underrated. You know, just to give a brief definition of this, churches do feel compelled sometimes to give every single ministry its unique name. So the name of the church is, Bethany Church, and their youth group is, Impact Youth, and the men's ministry is like, Bacon Guns and Monster Trucks, and the women's ministry is like, Women of Well-Watered Joy. And it's like, okay, like none of this makes sense. So just call it Bethany Women, Bethany Men, Bethany Youth, Bethany Church. You have a name. This is where branding does matter. Use the name. The branding gets diluted if every single ministry has its own brand. It's the Apple Watch. It's the Apple iPad. It's the Apple App Store. They're not coming up with something new every single time, right? It's the McChicken. It's the McGrill. It's the McRib. It's the McDonald's. You got something great? Stick with it.
Nice. So don't use some random Hebrew word and that you have to tell somebody what it means before you can even tell them it's the men's ministry. Yeah.
Well, that's how it works out, right? Like, join us for Bacon, Guns, and Monster Trucks. What is that? It's the Bethany Men's Ministry. You could have just said, join the Bethany Men's Ministry. Yeah, you're right. We could have.
That's so true. YouTube for churches.
Ooh, underrated. Second most visited website in the world. Somehow still gaining traction with younger people. YouTube Shorts is like all whatever is after Gen Z, if we're calling it Gen Alpha or whatever. Like YouTube is the only social platform that more than half of every age demo from 15 years younger to 55 plus is on. Like every demo, more than half on YouTube. No other social platform like that, because it's more than a social platform, but it is also still a social platform. Underrated.
Awesome, dude. Those are great thoughts. Final question, and this is for me in my relationship with my wife. I have a bottle of Curve that has been in my dresser for about 15 years and is the only fragrance I own. And I know that you are a fragrance king. So for the worship pastors, the media guys out there that need something for the Sunday morning experience that's not going to, they don't want to be Phyllis from The Office driving people out of the booth with their fragrances. But as the
it's made from real pine.
Yeah, exactly. What would you say for a beginner as myself to look into?
Well, let's talk about just the seasonal. I think that, seasonal, recognizing the time of the year is important. You don't want a real spicy, amber, syrupy fragrance as we enter into the springtime here. You want something a bit fresher. Terre d'Hermès, which is Hermès's very popular line, is really good for spring. Also pretty accessible in terms of price. Terre d'Hermès Eau Givrée, fizzy lemon with some woods, very nice. Givenchy Gentleman EDT Intense, very nice for this time of year. If you're looking for something that's a bit more high end, Creed Himalaya, probably my favorite. That's one of my favorite spring ones. Oh, Creed Green Irish Tweed, I strike it. That's the favorite. Wow, what a banger. That is the Green Irish Springfield. You're rolling in an Irish, just on a nice little hill. It's a great time. We could talk about this forever, but those are a few good ideas. Something fresh as we enter the rest of the year. All you need really is two fragrances, one for spring and summer, one for autumn and winter. So we're entering spring, summer 23 here. Get something fresh, get something citrusy, get something effervescent.
Man, that's good stuff. Okay, I'm going to check those out. Now, I think I know what it feels like whenever I start talking about like camera gear and weird technical jargon, because a lot of that stuff were those real words, I'm not sure, but we're going to check it out.
Shutter speed, aperture.
Right. Yeah. Awesome, dude. Well, where can people, where would you want them to connect to you first? Where's your most timely content being posted?
Well, if you are a podcast listener, you can just search my name in your podcast player of choice or Pro Church Tools. We do a show every Wednesday with my co-host, Alexander Mills, who is a pastor himself. So it's nice. I talk kind of the strategy and, kind of the organizational stuff. And he's like, yeah, but what about the Lord? And he kind of brings that in. So the Pro Church Tools show is the name of that. Also, YouTube publishing most weeks. Search my name. Whatever platform you like, I'm assuredly on there. So search my name or Pro Church Tools and find us there. All of our content is free. So
that's awesome. Well, you guys do a great job. Thanks so much for being on the channel. Remember, guys, we do a lot of great things. Let's do it all for God's glory. We'll see you in the next one.